In 2023, I wrote an article titled The Lyme Disease Lie for Wise Traditions, the official publication of the Western Aid Prize Foundation. It was based on a video we had produced that year, also titled The Lyme Disease Lie. In these publications, I outlined how Lyme disease was a nonsensical disease diagnosis due to the highly variable and non-specific symptoms. Furthermore was the use of a hopeless antibody assay as the main diagnostic test, because the Borrelia bacteria are usually not found in alleged cases. The icing on the cake was the complete absence of experimental evidence for Borrelia being able to cause disease in humans or an animal model. Well, I can tell you that people were triggered, particularly those who had been diagnosed with Lyme disease. Partly as a result of that, Mark and I will be travelling to the United States to talk about this some more. However, in this video, I'm going to cover another aspect of Lyme disease. While RFK Jr is well known for promoting gain of function and lab-leak narratives, including the alleged COVID virus, perhaps lesser known is his suggestion that Lyme disease was the result of a US military bioweapons program. So let's have a look at one of the worst kept secrets involving a research facility off the coast of New York in another round of the Lyme Disease Lie. Some apparent health freedom advocates who have captured the attention of huge audiences are, wittingly or not, doing the bidding of the biosecurity state. By maintaining and heightening the fear factor of the gain-of-function boogeyman, these influencers are creating fertile ground for future psychological terror campaigns. Health Freedom Defence Fund. Plum Island is a small island, about 840 acres in size, located off the end of Long Island, New York. Note that it is only about 15 miles from Old Lyme, Connecticut, on the mainland. This is of interest for some people because that is where Lyme disease got its name in the 1970s, when a cluster of alleged cases were identified. It is a theme that is reminiscent of the COVID-19 show. Remember, in early 2020, when images of the Wuhan Institute of Virology were everywhere, and diagrams such as this one, showing its proximity to the wet market, were presented as the smoking gun. But then the lab leak was dismissed as a crazy conspiracy theory, before doing a boomerang and coming back to be an official narrative. Look, even the map is back on this White House webpage.
China, China, China.
In what looks like a movie trailer, Operation Warp Speed's Donald Trump is back in the starring role. Lyme disease is not at these Hollywood production levels, for now at least, but has a similar plot line. In fact, last month, Newsday published an article with the title, "Did Lyme disease originate on Plum Island? Scientists, federal agency, shoot down RFK Jr theory." They reported that infectious disease experts, as well as the Department of Homeland Security, which runs the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, dismissed the possibility that Lyme was created as a biological weapon. The bacteria responsible for Lyme disease has been found in specimens dating back well before the establishment of the government research lab on Plum Island, including in tick samples and in a 5,300-year-old mummy. At this point, bioweapon supporters are likely to accuse government officials of covering things up, just like they did with COVID, right? To those that are awake, this is another clown show where the public are offered two narratives, seemingly with science and experts on either side weighing in with their opinions.
2 + 2 is 4. 2 + 2 is 4. 2 + 2 is 4.
I can see why this is so popular.
It was indeed frustrating to see people becoming aware of so much of the COVID fraud, whether it be the vaccines, PCR tests, face masks, or lockdowns, but then not seeing that the basis of the fraud was also a fraud. Instead, they hold that the media, who couldn't be trusted about any of these things, can be trusted to bring truthful information about virology and germ theory.
The sharing of biased and
False news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets are true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think.
Going back to the Newsday article, it also maintains the establishment's overall Lyme disease narrative, keeping the public on the plantation intentionally or not, with a couple of options. As we have outlined before in a number of presentations, government agencies and mysterious research facilities are often key elements in the script surrounding alleged bioweapons. For example, in Gain of Function Garbage, we covered the fanciful story that DARPA and the Wuhan Institute of Virology created a new virus in the form of SARS-CoV-2. In Bioweapons BS, we investigated Ken Allebeck and his unverifiable claims about Russian bioweapon programs on Rebirth Island, as well as alleged Ebola virus research inside England's Porton Down military campus. Then in Bioweapons 101, the story of anthrax, we covered the apparent accidental release of anthrax spores from a military microbiology facility in Sverdlovsk in the former Soviet Union in 1979. It's always very helpful that these facilities and many of the associated agencies make so much of this top secret information about germ warfare available to the public. Now, Plum Island, New York, is not quite one of these worst kept secrets, probably because the involved germs are not as good for fear-invoking clickbait. Or perhaps it doesn't seem as exciting as the more famous Fort Detrick base, operated by the US military. On the lighter side, it seems even Hannibal Lecter couldn't hide his disappointment when offered a free vacation to Plum Island.
Plum Island Animal Disease Research Center. Sounds charming.
That's only part of the island. There's very nice beach. Terns nest there. There's beautiful...
Terns?
The Newsday story goes on to state that for the last 70 years, Plum Island has served as a highly guarded federal animal research facility to protect the nation's livestock and other animals from African swine fever and foot and mouth disease, which can devastate the food supply. Its isolated location and mysterious history have led to various theories about what goes on there. The article then goes on to discuss some books that RFK Jr. had mentioned as possible evidence that Lyme disease was part of a military bioweapons program. Newsday states that two of the book authors who float the theory confirmed they have no direct evidence that Lyme was released from Plum Island. Well, that's a bit of a spoiler, but as we'll see, it gets worse. The first book is Lab 257, the disturbing story of the government's secret Plum Island germ laboratory by lawyer Michael Carroll. Newsday reported that Carroll said he uncovered declassified government documents showing the Army planned to use the lab at Plum Island to develop germ warfare in the early 1950s. Uncovered declassified documents?
What the hell does that mean?
In reality, Carroll doesn't uncover anything of scientific interest, as he accepts germ theory dogma involving Lyme disease, as well as other stories about imagined viruses. He admits that he didn't uncover any direct link to Lyme disease work being done on Plum Island, so his claim falls into the category of speculation about fantasy. The other book is Bitten by Chris Newby. In this publication, the author describes her health problems that were eventually diagnosed as Lyme disease. While I'm not denying Chris Newby's accounts of being unwell, I would say that unfortunately she has accepted all of the germ theory nonsense, including the pseudoscientific claim that Borrelia bacteria are pathogenic and the cause of Lyme disease. Newby was interviewed by the Bay Area Lyme Foundation in 2023 and made some interesting comments, including, "They're accustomed to the AIDS test, which is 95% accurate, and healthcare providers are not used to a test that's 50% accurate." It's hard to know where to even start with these claims. Firstly, there is no AIDS test. Typically, there is an HIV antibody test, and it can be positive in dozens of conditions. We outline the fraud of HIV tests in Virus Mania, and you can also watch my video series of the Perth Group's Yin and Yang of HIV for more information on this. Adding to the non-specificity problem is that HIV antibody positive individuals are also more likely to test positive for Lyme disease antibodies. Newby's next claim that the Lyme disease test is 50% accurate is just as curious. If she is referring to the proportion of true positive and true negative results divided by the total number of tests here, then why not just flip a coin? Furthermore, what is the gold standard test she would be comparing this test to? As I outlined in the Lyme Disease Lie, there is no such test for this non-specific entity. This is a farcical state of affairs because the diagnosis is supposed to be based on a history of tick exposure, not a confirmed bite and symptoms. But these symptoms can be just about anything. So what about erythema migrans, the famous rash said to be specific to Lyme disease? Once again, this is not a specific type of rash, and the CDC even have a page called The Many Forms of Lyme Disease Rashes. This shows that the rash can be faint, could be crusted, and can appear in different shapes and colours, whereas this is said not to be erythema migrans because it's just an allergic reaction to an insect bite. At this point, we are likely to get some practitioners claiming that they know Lyme disease when they see it. But what are they referring to? Because they would have to be making up their own criteria as well. The wisest thing Chris Newby appears to say is, there's an over-reliance on believing tests are real. Unfortunately though, she is complaining that the Lyme disease antibody tests are missing cases. It is hard to emphasise just how bad this test is. For example, when they checked a group of healthy blood donors in Norway, it came back positive in 18% of them. In other words, even on their own terms, most people with positive antibodies do not have the alleged specific disease. And keep in mind, as always with antibody assays, a quote positive is set at an arbitrary level. We may all have so-called Borrelia antibodies, except most of us have concentrations that do not cause a positive assay result. It is interesting to see that many people have been captivated by Newby and her book Bitten. She has been promoted by RFK Jr, who hosted her in 2024 on a podcast titled Bioweapons and Lyme Disease with Chris Newby.
I test positive for Lyme disease. I got the Lyme disease from one of these ticks.
This podcast followed on from 2023 when Children's Health Defense published Is Lyme Disease the Result of a Bioweapon Gone Wrong? By another gain-of-fiction proponent, Dr. Joseph McCullough. None of them seem to grasp that Borrelia has not been shown to be pathogenic in a scientific study. Let's have a look at the equation. No pathogen equals no bioweapon. As a reminder, the definition of biological weapon is any of a number of disease-producing agents such as bacteria, viruses, rickettsia, fungi, toxins, or other biological agents that may be utilised as weapons against humans, animals, or plants. Now, as we outlined in When You Wish Upon a Bioweapon, chemical weapons are far more deadly and convenient than biological toxins. And with regard to microbes, it is part of the germ theory misconception because Koch's postulates have never been fulfilled for any of them. In ancient times, it was discovered that a besieged city or castle could have their water supply contaminated by throwing dead animals or humans into the upstream source. However, the effects on those drinking the water does not represent contagion or microbial pathogenicity. It represents poisoning through the ingestion of decomposing organic material that is not suitable for human consumption. In turn, the claim that one of the first recorded uses of biological warfare occurred in 1347, when Mongol forces are reported to have catapulted plague-infested bodies over the walls into the Black Sea port of Kaffa, is not backed by scientific evidence. No doubt it was a disgusting and intimidating sight, but that does not mean that it met the definition of biological warfare. You can also watch my video, What We Weren't Taught About the Plague, where we investigated what may have happened in the 1300s and analysed the verifiable scientific material. Once again, there was no evidence that the condition called the plague is contagious, and no evidence that the implicated bacterium, Yersinia pestis, is a pathogen. The gaslighting surrounding bioweapons is certainly effective. In my husband Mark's essay, HIV Inserts, Lies and Lab Leaks, he documented the fact that SARS-CoV-2 was widely promoted as a bioweapon from early February 2020. He wrote that 1. The lab leak claim was well developed and appeared at the start of the, quote, pandemic. 2. The Wuhan Institute of Virology was publicized by the Chinese government and in mainstream platforms. And 3. The so-called cover-up is known about by the majority of Americans. The debate over the origin of the COVID-19, quote, pandemic has been presented as a false dichotomy, where the uninitiated are asked to pick between 1. Zoonotic spillover, wet market bat cave, etc., or 2. Lab leak, accident versus deliberate. As we have seen with the corporate media toing and froing with the COVID lab leak story, they have been doing this for even longer with Lyme disease. For example, in August 2019, the Washington Post featured the headline, "No, Lyme disease is not an escaped military bioweapon, despite what conspiracy theorists say." The article originally featured in The Conversation and was written by Sam Telford, Professor of Infectious Disease and Global Health at Tufts University. It is reported that Professor Telford was involved in the development of the only approved human vaccine for Lyme disease. He is an internationally renowned expert in Lyme disease. As you would expect, he believes in the establishment version of Lyme disease, and his article rehashes the story. However, he pours cold water on the bioweapon theories. It gets more interesting in the comments section of the Conversation article when Chris Newby, the author of Bitten, gets stuck in, clearly not happy about the professor dismissing the possibility of biowarfare. Naturally, both Telford and Newby are on the germ theory plantation, so they are engaging in a debate downstream from the unestablished hypothesis of Borrelia having disease-causing abilities. Newby jumps the shark and states that the evidence laid out in Bitten leads us to believe that a different organism, likely a rickettsia viral hybrid, was made more virulent by military scientists. Now, we have certainly come across many strange claims in the world of germ mythology, but this is one of the strangest. It involves microbes that have not been shown to be pathogenic, combined with entities that have not been shown to exist, then being manipulated in a laboratory. Bioweapons are a fantasy concept, and unless one counts injectable application that only damage the recipient, there is no basis for viable products in the real world. That is why ourselves, Stefan Lenker, Andy Kaufman, Tom Cowan, Mike Stone, Christine Massey, and Michael Bryant have warned that while bioweapons are no threat to humanity, the fear of bioweapons is a narrative that can be used to effectively influence the public. Additionally, it provides another excuse for so-called biosecurity measures. Note the recently released fact sheet on the White House's website about, quote, improved safety and security of biological research. Similar to other events such as 9/11, what are initially sold to the public as required safety measures are then easily turned into excuses for civil rights restrictions and the advancing surveillance state. On that note, here is a little flashback to my video, When You Wish Upon a Bioweapon. The bioweapon gaslight keeps those that are questioning parts of the narrative from leaving the plantation completely. Even if they don't believe the, quote, official narrative, they still engage in anti-scientific thinking and ignore the stack of evidence that clearly refutes the entire concept of contagion. It is also unclear where alleged freedom fighters think their bioweapon expose narratives will lead. Do they think they or their allies will be in charge of the policing of alleged bioweapons? No, that fictional task will be accepted as real and gladly taken up by governments and their friends as they eagerly tighten the screws on the biosecurity surveillance state. Coming back to our main topic, we are not saying that people don't get sick, but entities such as Lyme disease are farcical and an unhelpful label for the recipient. It is also not to say that getting bitten by arachnids and insects does not cause skin reactions. The problem is blaming microbes such as Borrelia for instigating disease. Outside of ridiculous loads, typically given via unnatural routes, no microbes have been shown to be pathogenic in a controlled scientific experiment, and this goes right back to when Koch's postulates were first introduced in the late 1800s. As Mike Stone of Virology recently wrote, Robert Koch did not win the Nobel Prize for proving that Mycobacterium tuberculosis was pathogenic in humans. He was awarded for his work with tuberculosis. No mention was ever made that Koch had proved bacterium as the causative agent of the disease it was associated with. Mike Stone, TB or not TB? You can also check out the extensive resources at drsambailey.com, where Mark and I have spent years refuting the concept of germ theory, as well as the related notion of bioweapons. It is never a bad time to move beyond these unnecessary fear paradigms and into a better way of being. If you enjoyed this video, please visit supportdrsam.com.